Hi, welcome to the Nonprofit Mastermind podcast, where every week I do a deep dive into the strategies and mindset behind launching, scaling, and leading a high-impact nonprofit. I'm your host, Brooke Richie-Babbage. Working to make the world a more just and beautiful place is messy, complex, heart-wrenching, and ultimately deeply joyful and fulfilling work. And none of us can do it alone. That's why I started this podcast, this Mastermind community, to hold space for and share the learnings and the questions and the grapplings and the actual concrete strategies that allow us to move our social impact work forward together. So welcome to the Mastermind. I'm so glad you're here. So I talked last week about the gestalt of organizational clarity, capital, and capacity, and the role that all three play in helping you grow and lead your organization so that it can have real impact and, most importantly, sustain itself. This week, I want to take a more targeted look at one of the elements in that constellation: capacity, and specifically staff capacity. In reflecting on what to share on this podcast, I take most of my direction from the questions that I'm asked via email and through my coaching and training programs. I realized recently that I've been having a lot, and I mean a lot, of the same kinds of conversations around staff issues, and more precisely, staff challenges. Concerns about having the wrong people on staff, the wrong people in the wrong roles, not having enough people to do all the work, having people that won't own the work. There's no end to the nuanced list of challenges that we can have in growing and maintaining a healthy and effective staff. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into staffing and HR in this episode. It's something that I talk quite a bit about inside my group coaching programs because capacity is one of the three pillars that I teach. But it's a complex issue, as you know, and there's a lot there. Way too much to cover in any one podcast episode. I do, however, want to mention that I have an entire HR bundle of policies and document templates. They're editable and modifiable. And I have an entire bundle of every policy and every document you could ever need to set up or fix your HR infrastructure. You can learn more about it and get access to the bundle at richiebabbage.com/HR bundle. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here today, the systemization of it and the codification of it into policy and into protocols and processes you can do using these templates and policies that are in this bundle. So you can check it out if you want to learn more, richiebabbage.com/HR bundle. So what I want to touch on is a deep underlying belief that lies at the core of so many of these conversations that I've been having around staff challenges and sort of growing pains for organizations as they grow and build their staff and shift their staff. And it's a belief that gives rise to so much of the frustration that I'm hearing when I talk to the leaders that I work with. That is, if I can just hire the right people, they'll be able to do the work and I will be able to focus on the high leverage activities I need to focus on. So I get it. I have been there, believe me. I will share a quick story just to show how deeply I understand this sort of statement or belief or narrative. So when I shifted initially from just me and a part-time person, when I was first growing my organization, and I shifted from me and a part-time person to my first full-time hire, I was very excited. I was ready. And in my mind, a big part of why I was sort of going out on this hiring limb, which at the time felt like a hiring limb because I didn't quite know where the money was going to come from for the full salary for this other person besides me. plus benefits and all the things, right? So it was a bit of a hiring limb, but it was worth it because we really had reached a point where I needed somebody else to own an entire chunk of our work. They couldn't just report to me. I couldn't be the person who was ultimately accountable. I needed a co-owner. And so I was going to hire somebody and, in my mind, hand over the work. So I hired this first full-time person. She wound up staying with me the entire length of my organization. She was a great hire. But the first 3 months, from my perspective, were rocky. And the main reason, and I say this with a chuckle because it's really not fair to her, but it's where I was sort of in my hiring trajectory. The main reason that I struggled was because she kept wanting to meet with me. And I had mapped out what I thought was this really great and comprehensive onboarding process. It was multiple days long, 3 or 4 days long. We did a brain dump of everything I knew. I had handed over all my files. I was like, go forth. It's yours. You own it. You have full authority and autonomy to make decisions within this realm. And I meant it, right? You own this. Check in with me if you have any problems. Now, most of you listening can probably hear how that could be a problematic way to onboard someone. Sort of, spend 4 days with them and say, okay, go ahead and do the job. Good luck. But when you're in it and when you're really, 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 really busy, some of what we do in practice grows out of wishful thinking. And I think that's true for most of us. And that was definitely true for me. That ex ante, I would never have said that is the best way to hire and set somebody up to succeed. But I so desperately needed help. And the person that I hired was really competent and capable and highly skilled and the right person. So I sort of figured she'll figure it out, right? She'll either sink or swim, and I'm pretty sure she's going to swim and it'll be great. Now, the problem that I will lift up here, there are many problems with that. The problem that's relevant to what I want to talk about today is that when that didn't work, when she wanted to have check-in meetings, when she had a lot of questions about what I had sent her, clarification questions, when she did things really differently than I did, I started to think, maybe she's not the right person. Maybe I just have the wrong person in this role. And luckily, we made it through it. We talked. I was really transparent about where I was struggling. And luckily, she was really transparent about where she was struggling, and we figured it out. But I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned is that the management piece of leadership is not a nice to have. It's not an add-on. It is an actual, significant, concrete, discrete part of leading and running and growing an organization. And I hadn't really built in time for that. I had assumed that the only impact or the primary impact of hiring this new person would be to take everything off my plate that I really needed taken off my plate. And I didn't add back to my plate the management piece. So I share that because I really do understand where this narrative comes from. If I can hire the right people, they will be able to do the work. They are skilled, they are competent, they believe in this mission, they're good at what they do. They will take this work off my plate. So I'm going to encourage you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, what is the underlying belief that you have about your role as a leader and a manager that helps to fuel whatever situations you find yourself in with your staff? Every time you feel like there's something wrong person, wrong role, this person's not really doing what you would want or need them to do, the first question to always ask is, what is the underlying belief that I have about me, about my role, about my responsibility in this situation that is helping to undergird or fuel the situation. Some of it may and often is, may be and often is about the staff person. And some of it is almost always also about us as leaders and managers. So that's the starting place. And that's one of the things that I learned in my own hiring is just start off the analysis of any staffing challenge with what's the underlying narrative that I'm bringing to this sort of conversation, that I'm bringing to this situation. And when you sit in a moment of stillness and really let yourself self-reflect without judgment, without anxiety, you might find that deep down, you do share some version of the belief that I'm talking about here. That the right people just won't need that much management. They won't need that much from you. Now, to be fair, for some of you, as it was for me, this belief may actually be more of a hope. You have so much on your plate that you hope, you wish you could find the right combination of people who would magically not require too much of your time or energy. So I want to take a moment to break down what's often really going on so you can see how much of this might relate to your own life and work. Very often, what is actually happening when we are experiencing staffing problems or staffing challenges comes down to a question of design. Have you designed your staffing structure and culture in a way that supports your team's ability to thrive? And there are a few specific questions that I'm going to encourage you to ask yourself after you have assessed what's the underlying belief or narrative that I'm bringing to the table here. Go on to these questions and say, okay, how have I designed my staffing structure and culture? And in what way is that influencing what is showing up here, right? The situation that we're in. So the first question is, are you hiring the right people? Are you clear about the skills and competencies required and expected for the roles that are required in your organization? Are you clear about your needs versus wants for the roles? And this is a big one. There are lots of things that we craft in a job description. There are lots of things that we craft in the competencies that we look for and sort of what we are interviewing for when we're doing hiring. Some of those are required. They're necessary for the role. Some of them are just things that we might want for the role. And it can be really important to distinguish between the two because you're never going to find anybody that you hire that is able to do all of the things in all of the ways that you would want. So really distinguishing the way you would in any relationship with any person that you care about, what you actually need or must have from that person versus what you would love to see that person do. Maybe they could grow towards it. Maybe this person is just not going to fulfill that thing, right? So distinguishing between needs versus wants. Are you also hiring in a way that brings people onto the team that fit the culture that you're building? Some ways to think about hiring that I really, really encourage: standardized rubrics. Anybody who has ever done any coaching with me has heard me talk about standardized rubrics. I am a huge proponent of standardized rubrics, particularly when we are talking about hiring. They help us draw attention to and address the kinds of biases that can creep in that shape our hiring in ways we don't realize, blind spots. I, for example, have a real bias towards people who have a lot of ideas and a lot of energy. I find that when I'm hiring and I fall into a sort of cadence of conversation with someone where we are ideating together, which often happens because I tend to bring that out in people, I will come out of that conversation. And if it's an interview, come out of that interview and think that person's fantastic. That was there. That's great. We're going to get along great. So obviously when I was hiring, that was something I needed to be mindful of. not because I don't want to hire people that have an energy that gets along with me, but because more often than not, that's not actually what's what I'm hiring for, right? That's a bias that I need to be careful to note how it is impacting the rest of my assessment of that person. Another way that standardized rubrics can protect you, another story about a hiring fail on my part. I had this great person. This is also early on in my organization when I was trying to figure out staffing in ways that did not require the hiring of a full-time person, which is for growth stage organizations often a challenge, right? Our need outpaces our money. Our capital, our capacity needs outpace our capital, which I talked a little bit about last time in last week's episode. So I had this great person on my board. She was a lawyer. She loved legal policy work. And I really needed to hire someone for a policy role. Or I believed that I did. We had a policy role that we needed filled on the staff. And I thought it would be great to hire a person for that role. We eventually wound up filling that role in other ways through partnerships with law firms and a law school, which I have talked about in past episodes, how your structured network can also, in partnerships, can also be a source of capacity if you think creatively about filling roles as opposed to titles. Different topic for a different podcast, but needless to say, at the time, I wanted to hire a person for this role. And the board member was stepping off the board, was looking for a new role in her own professional trajectory. We got along wonderfully. We worked together for about a year and a half, and she didn't need a full salary and really, really wanted the job, really wanted to come and to be our director of policy. And I thought, win. I mean, this is fantastic. We get along. She's just a great policy thinker. She understands our mission and our work because she'd been on the board. Long story short, it was not the right hire. We did not use a rubric. She did not go through a process. I just hired her because I was weighing lots of factors that, while interesting and important, should not have decided the hire. Because what ultimately turned out to be true was that she had a very low tolerance for the pace and lack of structure that were endemic to where we were in our organizational life cycle. We were very much in the early growth stage, which I've also talked about on this podcast. And we were still very organic in how we moved together as a team. And she really needed more structure. She really needed more context, more of a container, more systems in order for her to thrive. And that would have come out in a standardized hiring process. So a few stories just to highlight the importance of asking this question. Are you hiring the right people? The second question, are the roles in your organization clear? Now, this really matters when you hire, but it also matters over time because roles shift as organizations grow and evolve. So as you're moving through the different growth stages in your organization, you're going to want to revisit this question. Even if you hire the right people, are the roles that they are filling still clear? Are the deliverables clear? Are the workflows clear? Do people have clear goals, work goals and work plans? Are the different plans for the different people on your team integrated with one another in a way that makes sense to everybody on the team? Do they all understand how they fit into the flow of work in the organization as it pertains to your strategic end goals? What is the relationship of one role to others on the team, not just to you, but to one another? How is work owned? Right? Is ownership clear? Who owns what? Who does not? I will say right now, shared ownership doesn't work. So you want really clear lines of accountability and responsibility. And these are the kinds of things that shift as organizations grow. So you want to ask yourself, are the roles clear here? Third, do the people on my team have the information and support they need to thrive? Am I getting questions from folks that suggest there are gaps in the information that they have? Is there information that I can give them? Is there information they need as peers on a team to get better at sharing? Are the workflows perhaps a challenge here? And flow of information. Are the questions that I'm getting suggesting that perhaps there are gaps in skills? And what is the role of the organization in filling those gaps? So, do the people on my team have the information and support and skills they need to thrive? Fourth question, and this is a big one. Do we have a strong and understood and cohesive team culture? Now, this is another thing that is not all caps, just a nice to have or an add-on. This is a key and central part of leadership. As you bring people onto your team, you have to make sure that you're building time into your calendar for explicit culture building. Positive culture requires intentionality and planning, just like everything else. And this then becomes the air that everyone on your team is breathing. Positive culture does not just happen. You either build the container or it builds itself. And when it builds itself, you can wind up with negativity, with confusion, with people acting in ways that feel out of alignment or contrary to how you would want your team or your organization to be moving through the world. And finally, how are we demonstrating value to the people on our team? And this is something that goes beyond compensation. Compensation or salary is one way to demonstrate value, but there are so many other ways that we bake the demonstration of value into both our culture and the way that we work with our peers and the way that the people who work for us receive our sort of demonstration of value. So you want to think about all of the different ways that you're demonstrating value and signaling value for the work that your team is putting in. Now, the last question, after you've asked all of these questions, there's one more sort of overarching question that actually maps onto and reshapes all of them. And this goes back to this key lesson that I learned when I was first starting out in hiring. And that is, what is your role and responsibility here as the leader? Now, these function both as a framework and as a checklist of sorts. If you are having a staffing challenge, or you are finding yourself frustrated with someone or someones on your team, you can ask yourself, are we experiencing challenges because this person's role isn't clear to them? Are we experiencing challenges because they lack a sense of autonomy? Have I truly handed over and clarified ownership? Or do I inadvertently take back responsibility every time this person comes to me with a problem? Does this person lack the skills that they would need to do the thing that I'm frustrated that they are not doing? And if that's the challenge, what's our role as an organization in helping them develop that set of skills? Right? So each of these questions that I've posed will give you insight into what's the real nature of this challenge or frustration. It may actually be, and you may find that the person that you are feeling challenged by or frustrated with is not in the right role or is not a right fit for the organization. And here's the thing I want to lift up. This is the work. This is the type of engagement and analysis that is baked into our role as leaders. It takes attention and it takes intention, and it's an absolutely critical part of running your organization. So as you're navigating the ups and downs of staff capacity issues, which will happen, try on this framework. Start from a place of assuming that everyone on your team believes in your mission, has chosen to work towards the same vision that you have, and that provided with the right container and supports, can thrive. If you start there and then walk through these buckets, you'll see where you land. And like I said, sometimes the problem is the person. Often the problem is some combination of what's going on with that person and the structure and culture and container that we have set up within which that person is functioning. So you can get this checklist as a fillable PDF worksheet inside the Architecture of Impact Toolkit, which is where I sort of collect and offer lots of worksheets and toolkits and resources that grow out of these podcast conversations. And the Architecture of Impact Toolkit is at richie-babbage.com/Architecture of Impact Toolkit. Pretty easy. You can also get that HR bundle that I talked about, which includes policies and documents in the areas of hiring, onboarding, compensation, performance management, and dispute resolution at richie-babbage.com/HR bundle. So that's all for this week. I will see you back here next week for a wonderful conversation with the folks at Change Elemental about rethinking how we structure governance and our governance board. Have a great week. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of the Nonprofit Mastermind podcast. If you want to begin to put into practice a lot of what we talk about here on this podcast, I encourage you to download the Architecture of Impact Toolkit at richie-babbage.com/Architecture of Impact Toolkit, where I translate what I talk about on this podcast into really great and actionable worksheets and toolkits so you can execute everything in your own organization. If you liked this podcast, I would also love for you to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you think that what we talk about here could benefit another leader in your life, please share with your friends. Finally, if you'd like more leadership in your life, you can sign up for my weekly 5-minute read Leadership Forward 321 newsletter. I send articles, resources, and inspiration every week curated around a leadership theme to help you lead your nonprofit better. You can sign up at richie-babbage.com/Leadership Forward 321. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you back here next week for more Mastermind.